Lake George Battlefield Moments, a production of the Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance, preserving our area's incredible history. A weekly feature on 93.5 FM and live streaming at lakefm.com.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bruce Venter. I am a trustee of the Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance. And today we have Dr. Siobhan Hart to do our podcast with us. She has been working diligently during the month of June. She's had some bad weather, too, she'll probably tell us about. But she is in her second year of doing archaeological work at the Lake George Battlefield Park. She is a professor at Skidmore College, and she brought two of her students with her this year to look at another part of the battlefield. Last year, she did some digging and found some very interesting things. But today, we're going to hear about what she found over the last couple of weeks. So, Dr. Hart, please tell us, did you find anything unusual? Did you find anything earth-shattering? I hope you have some cannonballs for my mantelpiece. I don't know. Tell us what you got.
Well, we've certainly found some interesting things. So when we started using ground-penetrating radar, which uses electromagnetic pulses to detect differences below the surface. And we were looking in an area that Dr. David Starbuck had excavated in 2016. So we're going back to that area because David's team found an 18th century concentration of artifacts that indicated French and Indian War and maybe early Revolutionary War deposits, but they never found the boundaries of it. They did a lot of digging, but they weren't able to figure out what the edge of the feature was and what the function of the feature was. So we were using ground-penetrating radar to survey a much larger area than a group of people could excavate in a short amount of time. And we were looking for those differences. Differences could be 18th century features or perhaps some earlier Native American features. We know that in that part of the park, there's also significant indigenous occupation. So when we started with the ground-penetrating radar, we identified a few places that looked interesting, different from the radar, and we targeted those for excavation. So we've put in 3 1-meter by 1-meter test units, and what we've found is a pretty significant 18th century deposit that includes ceramics, so parts of plates and cups and teacups, things that people were eating and drinking off of, glass, wine bottle glass, perhaps wine glasses, architectural materials, nails that are from the time period, parts of smoking pipes. So the things of daily life during the 18th century. We've also found Native American-made materials. So we found parts of bifaces, chipped stone, either spear points or arrowheads. We found the flakes that are the remains of maintaining those tools, the chipped stone manufacturing. And then we found some animal bone, deer bone, and just today we found a lead buckshot, which is 18th century. It matches one that's on display in the visitor center. So we're really finding this mix of indigenous and 18th century Euro and Euro-American material.
Yes, I stopped by one day. I was in the area for some other reason, and I saw you down there. And I think the ground-penetrating radar machine, it looks like a floor buffer in a way. That's what struck me by. And your students were diligently pushing it back and forth. And I assume that there's some rationale for how you go about setting all that up. Why don't you tell the folks about that?
So we work in systematically, right? We take the area that we're going to work in, divide it into grids, and then we work in one direction, so north to south and east to west, along transects, along lines. And we space those lines 25 centimeters apart, so it's a pretty small interval, and we're just collecting data along those lines. Once we collect it all, we download all that data to the computer and using some software, put all of those lines together to create images of a much larger area. And those images we can look at different depths and look at sort of individual slices and see the differences in the makeup of the soil, what the GPR renders as an image based on what it detects as differences in the soil composition, how it transmits the electromagnetic pulse. And we can take those images and then sort of see where there are the larger patterns. So it's a technique that's used often to find unmarked graves in cemetery spaces, shape of grave shafts. Here in the park, we're able to see the geological deposits, so we can see where the bedrock is, but then we can also see where there are these deposits of cultural materials over time. So we can use the radar and say, we want to look at, around 30 centimeters below the surface and see whether there are the outlines.
Now, this must be a great experience for your students. Did they enjoy themselves?
It's hard work. Archaeology is very physical. We're outside for the whole day and we're in a very beautiful place. So it is a wonderful place to work. But, archaeology is taxing because of the physical aspect and then because your brain is kind of constantly trying to make sense of all of the pieces of evidence that we're uncovering and trying to make sense of what we're seeing, what we know from our documentary research, what we saw on the radar, right, and putting it all together in the moment. So, yes, I think they're learning a lot and they're not turned off of archaeology. Yeah.
Well, that's good. Now, I'm intrigued by the buckshot that you mentioned. Would that lead you to believe that would be a piece that would be associated with the Americans that were here? And when I say Americans, I don't mean the provincials of the French and Indian War, but the Americans from the Revolutionary War.
It could date to either period, but that's where we look at the context that we found it in and try to make sense of, okay, well, what else was it found with? And are there other things that we can date from that deposit to say it's more likely to Rev War period? And I'm not a munitions expert, so I'm sure there are listeners out there who probably want to weigh in on this.
Yeah, I probably could think of a couple. Yeah. So you like this gig?
I think one of the things that is really edifying about it is the interest from both the folks that are part of the Lake George Battlefield Alliance, who have been very supportive of us in storing our equipment, being welcoming of us, facilitating all of the volunteers who've come to help us, but then just also engaging with the folks who come through the park and just kind of encounter us. This year we're in a much more visible location in the park. So we've had lots of folks who are just there to enjoy the park or who are interested in the history stop in. And almost everyone has some kind of story to tell about their connection to this place or to archaeology or, something that they've seen or read. So to see it in person and to understand how we know what we know about the past is, as an archaeologist, that's one of the things I'm really excited. And as a teacher, that's one of the things I get excited about.
Now, in addition to your students, you mentioned volunteers. How many volunteers signed up for this one?
We've had maybe 10-ish folks who have come. A few of them have come, almost every day that we've been working. Some of them are folks that have done archaeology in the park before, last year with my team, but also previously with David Starbuck. And then some of them are new. Some of them are folks that are new to archaeology, so they're kind of learning what we're doing for the first time. Or most of them have not had experience with GPR, so that was a kind of fun thing to get to. Some of the folks that have done dirt archaeology before, this other method that we're using, and to see them, start to get comfortable with the data collection for that.
Yeah, the day I stopped by, I had my beagle with me, and I've volunteered her to dig because she loves to dig, and she's digging up the beach all the time on me. So if you need another volunteer,
Okay.
should sign her up for next time. So what do you see in terms of the future for this project as a whole? Like, do you see this as a multi-year endeavor for you? Something? Assuming
that, the DEC will have us back and the state archaeologist continues to give us permission to do the work and that it, aligns with the interests of the Alliance. This year we've surveyed about 60 square meters of open part of the park just north of the visitor center. There's more closer to the visitor center and then all the way down to the lake. That would be location that would be ideal for the ground penetrating radar. I'm kind of envisioning what next steps might be. The other thing is that we've identified a number of anomalies, differences, things that we'd be interested in targeting and doing excavation. And we have a limited time to do that this season, but, that may be something that we can continue with. And then the New York State Museum team came in one day and did another remote sensing technique called magnetic susceptibility that we're just trying out too. And we're going to layer that onto what we found with the GPR and see if those two methods together are complementary. So that's another thing that could lead to kind of next steps.
Now, I know when you finish this month, you're going to write a report about what your findings are. Do you foresee this, your gathering of information being published in an academic journal? Do you have that as a goal?
It can be.
You already have tenure. Maybe you don't need another article.
That is one of the benefits of tenure, is that I can decide on what the right outlets are for publication. So certainly, academic publications are a possibility, but I see the audience for this work as being not sort of the niche historical archaeologists that are interested in this particular time period, but that it's something that there's broader interest in, and so academic publications are not always as accessible in terms of like people actually finding them, but also in the way that they're written, the language is not always accessible.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
So other formats, whether that's public presentations or, some kind of exhibition, whether that's a digital exhibition or documentary, I think there are other ways that the whole group of folks that are involved and might think would be a more appropriate outlet.
I think our president, John Denuzzo, has you scheduled to give a talk on your findings eventually. Is that correct?
So last year we did a talk after. So it takes a few months to get through all of the cataloging and analysis and to write the kind of formal report that I have to submit to the state archaeologists and DEC. And so last winter, I think it was in February, I did a talk on findings, and that would be something that we'd probably schedule again. And then I think this summer I'm scheduled to do two talks. One is at the Lake George Historical Society, and the other is at the Hillview Library. And so those two talks will be a kind of just immediately after ending fieldwork, preliminary findings.
I'm sure people in the area are very interested in this. This is I know David Starbuck was dearly loved for the work that he did. And we are so fortunate that you would come in and fill his slot, because there's a lot to be found on that battlefield. And it's just a wonderful thing. Well, thank you very much for telling us about your work this summer. My advice to folks that are listening, keep your eyes open for different events that will be scheduled that Dr. Hart will be involved in. And thank you for listening. That's Lake George Battlefield Moments.
Lake George Battlefield Moments, a production of the Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance, preserving our area's incredible history. For more on this topic, check out the Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance podcast, a weekly feature on Lake FM 93.5 FM and live streaming at lakefm.com. For more information, go to lakegeorgebattlefield.org and tune in every Saturday morning for Lake George Battlefield Moments.